Hey guys, tonight we're burrowing deep into one of the muddiest, loudest, and most profoundly uncomfortable slices of history. Life in the trenches of World War II. Forget Band of Brothers, forget epic movie speeches in crisp uniforms. Tonight, you're waking up face first in freezing mud, surrounded by strange smells, stranger noises, and the ever-present existential dread of wondering when, exactly, you will breathe your last breath. Before we embark on this journey through soggy socks and questionable cuisine, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy falling asleep to absurd historical suffering. And if you're still awake after this, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and whether you'd survive even a single night in a foxhole. Honestly, I'm betting not. Now, dim the lights. Switch on that box fan for maximum artillery ambience, get cozy, maybe even stack a few pillows for a trench fort. Are you ready to find out what it's like to sleep with your boots on, eat food out of a can with your helmet, and consider rats as emotional support animals? Do you ever wonder, how bad could trench foot really be? What's the official army policy on using your bayonet as a butter knife? What's that smell, and why is it moving? Would you last through a midnight air raid, or just fake your own injury for a ticket home? How many weeks can one human survive on tinned meat, anxiety, and the knowledge that your next bath is a rumor? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1943 in a trench somewhere in Europe. It's cold, it's wet, you're already regretting all your life choices, and there's something suspiciously alive in your boots. Welcome to the front lines. Good luck. Congratulations, it's 0:30, and you're pried from sleep by a sound that could either be distant artillery or Private Jenkins snoring through his gas mask. Your first conscious thought is that your pillow is suspiciously squishy. Oh wait, that's just a sandbag, and it's wetter than a sponge in a car wash. You reach down to find your blanket, only to discover you've been using it as a towel all night. Welcome to morning in the trenches, where the sun is a rumor and personal hygiene is a distant dream. You lie there for a moment, letting your brain reboot, your body gently marinating in the combined aromas of wet wool, old tobacco, and something you're pretty sure used to be food. The air is thick, equal parts damp, cold, and the unique scent of wartime cologne, which is mostly mud with undertones of defeat. It's too early for this, but you know if you don't get up now, the sergeant will appear and motivate you with the power of shouting and the ever-present threat of latrine duty. You'd give anything to snooze your way back to peacetime. But your mattress has the support of an overcooked noodle and a lingering chill that's slowly creeping up your spine. There's a ritual to getting up, a sequence of movements perfected by repetition and necessity. First, you gently check your boots, never with your bare hand. Not after last week's frog incident. You give them a shake, hoping nothing scurries out. Only when you're reasonably sure your boots aren't doubling as a wildlife refuge do you slide them on, one soggy foot at a time. The sensation is immediate and horrifying. Cold, damp, and just a little bit squishy, like stepping into a pudding cup left outside in the rain. You reach for your helmet, which doubles as your nightstand, wash basin, soup bowl, and, on one memorable occasion, emergency toilet. It's a multi-purpose marvel, albeit one that never quite loses its bouquet of last week's stew. You tap out yesterday's mud, offer a brief prayer that no snails have moved in, and slap it on your head. Fashion, as always, takes a back seat to survival. Around you, the trench is already coming to life, or at least groaning, grumbling, and shuffling, in a way that passes for life in this damp purgatory. Someone down the line is arguing with their boots, another soul is muttering curses at a stubborn tin of meat, and Private Jenkins is, as always, somehow both asleep and loudly defending his honor in a dream. The soundscape is a blend of clattering mess tins, distant thuds, and that one guy who insists on practicing the harmonica before breakfast. You make a mental note to hide the harmonica later. You try to stand, but the mud has other ideas. It clings to your boots like a needy toddler, adding several pounds to each foot and threatening to claim your sock as a war trophy. Every step is an act of faith, and occasionally a slapstick comedy routine as you slip, slide, and perform an accidental interpretive dance known as trench yoga. Balance is optional. Dignity is forbidden. Your uniform, which started the war as a noble symbol of duty, now mostly symbolizes mildew and despair. There's a fresh tear in your trousers. Your coat smells like something that crawled out of the latrine and lost the will to live, and your socks have achieved a level of stiffness usually reserved for cardboard and regret. You contemplate the idea of freshening up, but the only water available is the puddle that just tried to eat your boot. This is how your day begins. Cold, wet, slightly itchy, and accompanied by a chorus of equally miserable comrades. The only warmth comes from the occasional joke, the camaraderie of shared suffering, and, if you're lucky, a half-remembered song. You realize, not for the first time, that surviving another day in the trenches is less about heroics and more about not accidentally gluing yourself to the ground. You take a deep breath, cough, and wish for coffee that isn't made from army-issued sorrow. Good morning. You're alive, upright, and only a little bit muddy. In trench terms, that's a victory. Let's talk about warmth, specifically your total lack of it. It's winter. You're wearing 3 uniforms, 2 pairs of socks, and a scarf your grandmother knitted before the war started, and you're still shivering like a chihuahua in a rainstorm. The only thing hotter than the inside of your boots is the steaming mug of tea you've been fantasizing about for 6 hours. Your breath fogs the air, your fingers are numb, and you're pretty sure you've invented a new form of shivering. Spoiler: nobody's impressed. You'd think, surrounded by a few dozen adult humans, that body heat would count for something. It does, technically, but only in the sense that everyone is equally cold and equally irritable about it. The laws of thermodynamics take one look at trench life and simply pack up and leave. You press yourself against a sandbag for shelter, but all you get is a wet backside and the vague sense you've offended the laws of insulation. The daily routine in the frozen trenches is less carpe diem and more carpe anything that isn't frozen solid. Each morning you crawl out of your damp foxhole and wonder if your toes still belong to you. You knock on your boots, hoping for a friendly echo, but instead you get the sound of frozen mud protesting your existence. You stomp your feet, you clap your hands, you blow on your fingers until they're as moist as your morale. None of it works. The wind slices through your coat with surgical precision, whispering sweet nothings like, "You should have stayed in accounting." If you're lucky, you have a fire. If you're really lucky, it's not just for show. Fires in the trenches are a rare luxury, rationed like a secret family recipe. You huddle around a tiny flame, 6 people deep, all trying to toast the same sausage. The warmth never reaches your toes, but at least you get the brief pleasure of feeling your eyebrows singe. There's always one optimist who insists on boiling water for tea, and you all pretend you don't see the tea bag being used for the 3rd time this week. At night, warmth becomes a group hallucination. You pile on whatever you can find. Greatcoats, newspapers, sandbags, possibly Jenkins if he falls asleep first. You curl into the fetal position and think warm thoughts, blankets, hot baths, the sun-drenched beaches of somewhere that isn't here. Instead, you wake up spooning a shovel and wondering if your knees have actually fused together. The phrase, "share your body heat," is redefined when half the squad is arranged like a pile of firewood, all snoring in harmony and pretending not to notice the suspiciously warm patch near Jenkins. There's a special kind of envy reserved for the guy who claims his grandma sent him woolen underwear. You briefly consider a life of crime just to acquire another pair of socks, but then you remember that theft in the trenches is punishable by, well, being slightly less popular than you already are. You try to stay dry. Everyone does. But the trenches have opinions about this, and their favourite is perpetually moist. Water leaks from above, creeps in from below, and occasionally drops directly down the back of your neck, as if orchestrated by a particularly sadistic weather god. Every day you listen to the old hands swap tips about keeping warm, layer your socks, rub your feet with bacon fat, think hot thoughts. One guy claims he hasn't felt cold since 41. But everyone knows that's just because his nerve endings gave up. You're starting to suspect the only real way to stay warm is to dig a tunnel straight to Egypt. Or, more realistically, to just accept that you will never, ever feel your toes again. In the end, warmth in the trenches is a rare, fleeting thing, like good coffee or an undisturbed night's sleep. You learn to treasure the little moments. The accidental sunbeam, the cup of lukewarm tea, the brief, glorious burn of a hand, warm a packet that's been passed around like holy relic. The cold is relentless, but so are you. You might not be warm, but you're still here. And in trench logic, that counts as a win. You're hungry. Unfortunately, your options are limited to army biscuits, which taste like sadness, and tinned meat, which tastes like regret. You try to spread some jam on your biscuit, but the jam is frozen solid, and the biscuit snaps in half, launching a shard into Jenkins' coffee. Nobody says anything. This is breakfast now. You sit cross-legged in the mud, staring down at your rations like you're about to negotiate a hostage exchange. On one side, a tin of what the label calls meat, but which you suspect is more existential concept than animal product. On the other, the legendary hardtack biscuit, designed in some secret government lab to survive all known forms of warfare, natural disaster, and possibly nuclear winter. You could break a tooth on this thing, or just use it as a replacement sandbag in an emergency. The jam, when you can get it, is a delicacy. Some say it's made from actual fruit, but you have your doubts. Its primary state is rock solid, but occasionally, if the weather warms up, it enters a second phase. Goo that stains everything it touches. You try not to think about the colour. Nobody's really sure if it's supposed to be raspberry, blackberry, or something red that passed for a berry once in 1927. Next comes the bully beef, aka corned beef, aka meat in the same sense that cheese slices are dairy. You open the can with a twisty, finger-pinching key, praying you don't slice your thumb. The contents slide out with a slurp and a wobble. It's pink, it's gelatinous. It wobbles like it's considering escape. You take a bite. Congratulations, you've just consumed more salt than an Olympic swimming pool. Tea is technically available, provided you can find a fire and a tin mug that doesn't already have a family of ants living in it. The tea is weak, tepid, and brewed from something that might have been leaves once upon a time. You drink it anyway, grateful for anything vaguely warm and liquid. Some genius always tries to make coffee out of the leftover tea leaves, which everyone agrees is a war crime. Breakfast is less a meal and more a social experiment in lowered expectations. You eat quickly, hunched against the drizzle, shivering as you gnaw on your biscuit and listen to Jenkins grumble about his gritty coffee. Nobody bothers to brush off the dirt before eating. If you drop your biscuit, you just pick it up and hope the mud adds flavour. Everything already tastes like earth anyway. Sometimes you get a surprise, a single raisin, a sliver of something that used to be carrot, a faint whisper of pepper. You savour it for a moment, then it's gone. Back to beige, bland and boring. As you chew, you hear stories from the old-timers. Tales of pre-war breakfasts, fluffy eggs and hot toast, porridge with brown sugar, bacon that didn't come from a tin and didn't bounce when you dropped it. You all agree these are fever dreams. The only hot breakfast in the trench is whatever the cook accidentally incinerates, and nobody's had a fresh egg since the war started. Even the chickens have standards. You might try trading with your mates, swapping jam for an extra biscuit, or offering up a slightly less dented can of meat for a promise of dry socks later. It's a high-stakes game, and alliances shift faster than the weather. Sometimes Jenkins wins, sometimes you do. But the real winner is always the rat that sneaks off with half your breakfast when you're not looking. By the time you've finished, your hands are stiff, your face is numb, and your spirits are somewhere near the bottom of your tin mug. Still, you manage a smile. It might not be gourmet, but you're fed. You survived another meal without breaking a tooth or accidentally eating a bug that you noticed. In trench logic, that's a culinary victory. So you pack away your tin, dust off your hands, and prepare for the next adventure. Lunch, which is exactly like breakfast, only slightly colder. Bon appetit. Nature calls, and you can't just ignore it, even in a war zone. The latrine is a hole dug by someone with more optimism than engineering skill. There's no privacy, just a thin burlap privacy curtain that flaps in the wind, offering an excellent view of your fellow soldiers contemplating their life choices. The smell alone could be classified as chemical warfare. Welcome to the least glamorous part of trench life, where the hierarchy is simple. There's dignity, and then there's everyone who's ever used the trench latrine. You shuffle toward it with dread, your boots slipping in mud of increasingly suspicious origin, all the while pretending you don't notice the fine mist of funk drifting on the breeze. If you're lucky, the last user didn't leave you any surprises. If you're unlucky, you learn that some people think close enough counts for aim, and others are just creative with their definition of whole. Waiting in line for your turn is a masterclass in silent camaraderie. You all do your best to avoid eye contact, staring instead at the horizon, the ground, or anywhere but the person currently occupying the throne. There's a shared, unspoken pact. Nobody judges, nobody hurries, and above all, nobody mentions the time Jenkins lost his balance and became a trench legend. What happens in the latrine stays in the latrine, unless it comes back on your boots. Let's talk about the actual construction. Calling it a hole is generous. Sometimes it's just a shallow trench, barely deep enough to discourage rats, who, by the way, consider the whole area their all-you-can-eat buffet. If you're especially unlucky, the sides of the latrine have caved in overnight, turning a basic necessity into an obstacle course where the penalty for losing is, well, you can imagine. Every so often, some bright soul suggests improving the facilities, lining the pit with planks, digging it deeper, adding lime to keep things sanitary. This is met with the enthusiasm of people who've already accepted their fate. The smell is legendary. It's not just bad. It's a living, evolving entity. It greets you before you even see the latrine, a warning shot across your olfactory senses. In summer, the heat gives it new powers, sending up waves of odor that mingle artfully with sweat, socks, and despair. In winter, it freezes, turning the latrine into a hazardous skating rink and adding slip and slide to the long list of things you never wanted in a bathroom. And privacy? Please. The burlap curtain is just there to make you think you have privacy. It flutters dramatically with every gust, revealing you in your most vulnerable moment to anyone passing by, or worse, to a visiting officer. If you drop anything, a cap, a mess tin, your will to live, it's gone forever. Nobody retrieves items from the trench latrine. There are legends about a guy who tried. He never spoke of what he saw. There's also the ongoing mystery of latrine etiquette. How far back in line do you stand? How much conversation is allowed? Is it ever okay to whistle? The answers, as far as possible, none at all, and absolutely not. The only appropriate topic of discussion is complaining about the smell, and even then, you're only allowed one remark per visit. Anything more, and you're on latrine cleaning duty. Sometimes there are improvements, a plank to balance on, a tin can of lime to sprinkle, maybe a soap ration if supply is running high. It isn't. The truth is, you get used to it. You develop a sixth sense for when the latrine is least crowded, and a set of squatting muscles worthy of Olympic gold. In some ways, it's the great equalizer. No matter your rank, your background, or how many medals you've earned, everyone faces the same reality. It's you, the whole, and the hope you'll get out with your boots, and your dignity intact. Back in the comfort of modern life, you might complain about a dirty gas station bathroom, or sigh when the office restroom runs out of paper towels. But after a week in the trench latrine, you'll never take privacy, plumbing, or the gentle scent of lavender soap for granted again. A letter arrives. It's from your mother or your spouse. Or that neighbor who's still pretending to care about your pet goldfish. The envelope smells faintly of onions and guilt. You read the words, imagining a life with dry socks, heated rooms, and people who don't wake you up with bayonet jokes. For a brief moment, you remember what hope felt like. Mail call in the trenches is its own kind of ceremony. There's a ripple of excitement, grown men nudging each other, feigning indifference while secretly straining to hear their names. The postman, who everyone respects purely because he brings news from a world that doesn't involve mud, stands atop an old ammunition crate, sorting through a stack of battered envelopes. Each letter is a fragile lifeline, the paper slightly damp from rain, or, on a good day, only creased from a week in someone's knapsack. When your name is finally called, you pretend you weren't waiting. You accept your envelope with all the solemn dignity you can muster, only to be betrayed by a wave of homesickness the second you catch sight of the handwriting. Maybe it's your dad's neat script, or your sister's loop-the-loops, or your best mate's chicken scratch promising to take you out for a pint once you've finished messing about in the mud. And, inevitably, that ever-present whiff of onions, courtesy of someone in the supply chain packing the family groceries and the family news in the same basket. You open the letter carefully, hands shaking just a bit, not from the cold this time, but from the anticipation. The words spill out, ordinary and wonderful. Tales of the neighbor's new chickens, an argument about the price of potatoes. A joke that was probably only funny 3 weeks ago when the letter was written. Sometimes there's a bit of local gossip, Mrs. Talbot's runaway goose, or the vicar's unfortunate incident with a leaky roof. In that moment, you're not a soldier. You're just you. Someone with a real bed, a front door, and people who know what you look like without a helmet. Every so often, someone includes a little something extra. A pressed flower, now a brownish pancake. A paper clipping about the home football team's glorious defeat. Or, for the lucky few, a carefully folded ration of tea, sugar, or, miracle of miracles, a pair of hand-knitted socks. You bury your face in them, breathing in the smell of home and onions, and swear to never complain about wool being itchy ever again. You might even tear up a little, but you blame it on the onions. Letters from home are more than words. They're proof that somewhere, outside of all this mud and noise, the world is carrying on. There are people who still worry about your appetite, your health, and whether you've remembered to say thank you for your birthday jumper, which, yes, you are still wearing under 2 layers of trench uniform. Thank you very much. The letters are read and reread, sometimes aloud for a laugh, sometimes silently in the dim light of the dugout, the words so familiar you could recite them backwards. Jenkins, on his 3rd rereading of a postcard from his aunt, swears it's the secret to keeping morale up. Someone else has a letter from their sweetheart that's held together by more hope than paper. You notice the tough guys, the old hands, tucking envelopes into pockets over their hearts, pretending it's just for safekeeping. Nobody believes them, but nobody says a word. Eventually you tuck your letter away, safely hidden from rain and rats and the prying eyes of your less fortunate mates. For a little while the world feels less heavy. You've got dry socks on your mind and memories to keep you warm, at least until the next round of mail call or until the onions wear off. In the trenches, hope doesn't arrive in grand speeches or heroic charges. It comes in small, crumpled envelopes that smell like home, laughter, and yes, onions. And that's enough to get you through another muddy morning. It's time to get dressed. The good news, you only have one outfit, so there's no decision fatigue. The bad news, the outfit is made from wool that itches like medieval pennants and fits like it was designed by a committee of sleep-deprived accountants. Your boots are either 2 sizes too big or 1 size too small. Fashion has left the building. The morning ritual of putting on your uniform is a tragic comedy in 3 acts. You start with the undershirt, a once white relic now permanently stained the colour of weak tea, with a texture somewhere between burlap sack and emergency sandpaper. Pulling it over your head, you scratch at last night's collection of mystery bites and wonder if you should just invent a new clothing material from spare rations and willpower. Next comes the main event. The wool, tunic and trousers, issued by a quartermaster who clearly believed the human body comes in exactly two sizes, smallish and vague approximation of a tent. The wool is so dense and unyielding, it's rumoured to be bullet-resistant, though it definitely isn't water-resistant. It soaks up every drop of trench rain, doubling in weight and tripling in itchiness. If you stand still long enough, the fabric seems to fuse to your skin in a bond that can only be broken by brute force or divine intervention. The sleeves are always too short, so you get a delightful draft up your arms, while the waistband sits somewhere just north of your actual waistline, cutting into your ribs with the determined persistence of a medieval torture device. You try rolling up the cuffs or hitching your trousers with a spare bit of string, but the effect is less soldierly chic and more escaped scarecrow. Boots are the crowning glory of your ensemble, each pair chosen at random from a bin marked close enough. They might flop around your feet like clown shoes or squeeze your toes so tightly you can hear them whispering apologies to each other. The soles are made of a leather that could charitably be described as suggestive of rubber, and after a few weeks in the trenches, they're so caked with mud and memories that you start to think they're just part of your anatomy. Laces are a luxury. You learn to tie them with whatever you can find, bits of wire, string, or, in a pinch, the last remaining thread of your patience. Then there's the greatcoat, a thick, woolen behemoth designed to keep you warm, or possibly to smother you in your sleep. Once you wrangle your way into it, you're roughly twice your normal width, unable to lower your arms, and resemble an extra in a movie called Attack of the Walking Blankets. The coat's pockets are bottomless, filled with mysterious objects, half a biscuit, a broken pencil, the letter you forgot to send, and a handful of lint that could double as insulation. You top it all off with a helmet, which technically protects your head but also doubles as a portable soup bowl, a rain catcher, and a stylish hat for the latest in mud-caked chic. The chin strap is either so loose it flaps in the wind, or so tight you wonder if it's supposed to restrict oxygen as a motivational tool. Personal grooming is a losing battle. No matter how you tuck, button or belt, your uniform instantly attracts every speck of mud, ash, and whatever mysterious substance Jenkins tracked in last night. Your reflection, if you could see it, would be a mosaic of stains, fraying seams, and the haunted look of someone who's been too long without elastic waistbands. And so, you trudge through another day dressed for survival rather than style. In the trenches, everyone is equal, equally cold, equally uncomfortable, and equally convinced that, given the choice, they'd swap the whole ensemble for a nice soft pair of pajamas, preferably with an elastic waistband and not a single woolen thread in sight. Today's task: improving the trench. This means grabbing a shovel and trying to turn mud into architecture. The sandbags collapse, the duckboards float away, and the walls threaten to fall in every time it rains. The only thing keeping you going is the knowledge that, somewhere, there's a general with very clean boots. You stare down at your weapon of the day, a battered shovel with a handle so splintered it could double as a medieval torture device. The metal blade is bent at an angle that suggests it's seen things, and the whole tool feels heavier than your sense of regret. The mission is simple: shore up the walls, drain the water, rebuild the parapet, and generally make the trench less likely to swallow you whole by lunchtime. Simple, that is, if you're a professional swamp engineer with a fondness for Sisyphean labour. Step 1 is always the same: attack the mud. Not just any mud, but the thick, gluey, life-sapping kind that clings to your boots, your uniform, and occasionally your dignity. You dig, you scoop, you fling mud over your shoulder, and 5 minutes later, it feels like the trench is deeper and your spirit is flatter. Every shovel load seems to generate 2 more, like some kind of military-grade hydra. Sometimes you catch yourself wondering if the mud is actually alive, slowly reclaiming every bit of territory you gain. Then there's the sandbags. In theory, they're supposed to reinforce the trench walls and keep everything in place. In practice, they explode in small bursts of ancient dirt the second you touch them. Each sandbag is a unique blend of optimism and disappointment, hand-stitched to let in the maximum possible amount of rainwater. When you pile them up, they slump over like a row of defeated teddy bears, then slowly ooze their contents into your socks. Jenkins swears by stacking them like bricks, but bricks, at least, don't dissolve when it rains. Duckboards are next, a fancy term for wooden planks laid along the bottom of the trench, allegedly to keep your feet out of the water. The reality, the boards float, drift, or sink depending on the mood of the mud. Sometimes you find yourself surfing on a rogue board, clutching your shovel, hoping you don't slide straight into Jenkins' makeshift latrine. The only dry spot is wherever the quartermaster is standing, and he's not moving. As you work, the walls of the trench occasionally sigh and cave in, undoing hours of hard labor with a wet, sticky flop. Someone suggests adding more sticks or branches to reinforce the sides, which works about as well as putting a band-aid on a sinking ship. You find yourself knee-deep in an engineering project that would make even the most desperate DIY home improvement show host give up and move to the desert. Through it all, you steal glances at your fellow trenchmates. Some dig with grim determination, others with a kind of cheerful madness. Jenkins, of course, is attempting to build a deluxe mud recliner, which collapses spectacularly the moment he sits down. Private Jones has invented a new form of swearing, combining 3 languages and a sound only heard in the deepest, darkest parts of the trench. As the hours drag on, your uniform becomes a second skin, damp, muddy, and slightly heavier with every passing minute. The line between man and mud blurs. By midday, you and your shovel have entered a kind of meditative trance. United in your shared suffering, you dream of houses with floors, real walls, and roofs that don't leak. You fantasize about indoor plumbing, dry towels, and the radical idea of furniture not made out of sandbags and splinters. Finally, you step back to survey your work. The trench looks exactly the same. Maybe worse. Maybe a little more crooked. Maybe your new improvements will last until the next rainstorm, or until someone sneezes too hard. But you did it. You dug in, again. In the great war against mud, there are no winners, only survivors, and the hope that the general with the clean boots appreciates abstract art. You've heard the stories, but nothing prepares you for the reality of trench rats. Huge, clever, and disturbingly well-fed, they travel in gangs, steal your food, and occasionally sleep on your feet for warmth. They're also the only things in the trench with any job satisfaction. Your first real encounter with a trench rat is a rite of passage, like losing your first tooth, or realizing coffee is a scam. At first, you just hear them. The soft, wet scurrying along the sandbags, the little squeaks from the shadows, the faint clatter of something being dragged away. Then, one night, you roll over and realize you're not alone. There, nestled comfortably on your ankle, is a rat roughly the size of a housecat, grooming itself with the smugness of a landlord collecting rent. The rats are everywhere. They dart between boots, leap over duckboards, and set up elaborate tunnels beneath your sleeping spot. They seem to possess an advanced knowledge of physics and trench layouts, navigating with the skill of Olympic gymnasts and the social confidence of a con artist at a family reunion. You soon realize that any unattended food, biscuits, jam, a single bean will be inspected, sampled, and, if you're not vigilant, brazenly carried off in broad daylight. Attempts to fight back are mostly theatre. At first, the platoon declares war, setting out traps, laying down the law, and, for a brief, optimistic hour, pretending to be in control. The rats respond by stealing the bait, the traps, and, in Jenkins' case, his spare sock. One particularly clever rat even learns to open tins by pushing them off the parapet until they split, leaving the evidence behind as if to say, "Thanks for lunch, see you tomorrow." The rats don't just take, they give too. Occasionally you'll wake to find a rat curled against your foot, sharing its questionable warmth with the enemy. This is less cute than it sounds, but on a freezing night, you don't complain too loudly. At some point, the line between pet and pest blurs. Private Jones names one Monty and starts feeding it bits of biscuit, claiming it brings good luck. Others are less sentimental, swearing vengeance with every stolen crumb. Either way, the rats remain unimpressed. You'd think the higher-ups would have a solution, but the official army manual is silent on the subject of giant rats as co-tenants. Suggestions from above range from keep your rations secure, hilarious, to try to maintain good trench hygiene, good one. Some old hands claim the rats were bred by the enemy to demoralize you. Others say the rats are smarter than most generals and just waiting for a promotion. Whatever the theory, everyone agrees on one thing: the rats are winning. There are legends, of course. The King Rat, who leads midnight raids on the supply tent, or the mysterious white rat that only appears before a really bad day. Superstitions develop. Don't look a rat in the eye. Never leave chocolate unattended. Always check your boots before putting them on. Rat-proofing becomes an art form. With food stored in impossible places, tied to the ceiling, buried in sandbags, or guarded by the meanest guy in the squad, who will absolutely eat it himself if given half a chance. Yet, for all their thieving, the rats are constant, dependable, and, in their own weird way, part of the trench family. They're survivors, just like you, living on scraps, dodging danger, making the best of mud and chaos. You catch yourself talking to them when the nights get long, cursing them in the morning, admiring their resilience in the afternoon. Somewhere far away, people keep pets for companionship and joy. In the trenches, you get rats for free, and, as it turns out, they're the only things in the whole miserable place who seem genuinely happy to be here. You can't blame them. After all, in a world of mud, cold, and endless waiting, someone ought to be enjoying themselves. Rain, endless, pitiless, horizontal rain. It soaks through your coat, your underwear, and your soul. The trench slowly turns into a moat, and every step is a gamble. Will it be shallow mud, deep mud, or sudden, ankle, twisting oblivion? Bonus, everything smells faintly of mildew and disappointment. You used to think of rain as something cozy, something to listen to as you drifted off to sleep in a warm, dry bed. But here in the trenches, rain is not your friend. It's a relentless, malicious force that seeps in from all directions, turning every surface into something squishy, slick, and slightly hostile. If you ever wondered what it feels like to live inside a cold, forgotten sponge, congratulations. You're living the dream. The trench, never much of a home, becomes a watery labyrinth. The duckboards float away like tiny ships setting sail for the land of lost footwear. Sandbags burst open, leaking their gritty contents into puddles so deep you start to wonder if you should ask for a life jacket with your morning coffee. Somewhere along the line, Jenkins tries to fashion a raft out of empty bully beef tins. It floats for 3 glorious minutes before sinking with all the dignity of a failed science project. Rain gets everywhere. It trickles down the back of your neck, seeps up through the soles of your boots, and gathers in secret pockets, just waiting to give you an unpleasant surprise when you least expect it. Your underwear, socks, and last ounce of optimism all succumb. You develop an internal dampness that no amount of wringing out can ever fix. Even the rats look annoyed, huddling together in little clumps under bits of tarp, glaring at you as if you're the reason their fur is frizzy. Everything you own, everything you touch, has a permanent, damp sheen. Letters from home arrive soggy, their ink running like mascara after a tragic breakup. Your biscuit rations are so moist you could use them as sponges, and even your cigarettes disintegrate at the slightest provocation. You light one anyway, because you need the illusion of warmth, and spend the next 5 minutes watching it slowly sizzle into oblivion. The smells, well, let's just say the rain is not an air freshener. There's a special trench bouquet, a blend of mold, sweat, wet wool, and that mysterious something that's been lurking in the bottom of the supply box since September. If you ever wanted to know what disappointment smells like, just take a deep breath. You'll find out. Every surface grows a thin, slimy fuzz. Nature's way of telling you that yes, you are now part of the ecosystem. Trying to keep anything dry is an exercise in creative futility. You invent elaborate tarp arrangements, stack sandbags into wonky canopies, and even try to dry your socks by holding them over a candle. Spoiler, you burn your socks. The only thing that really dries out here is your sense of humor, which goes from wry to sarcastic to deeply existential within the span of a single downpour. Sleep? Forget it. The constant pitter-patter, slap-slap, and occasional distant squelch means you're always half awake, dreaming of bathtubs that don't involve mud and the glorious, fictional idea of heated floors. You lie there, wrapped in a damp blanket, contemplating whether your toes will ever feel warm again. Yet, you endure. You become a connoisseur of rain. Is this the light, mocking drizzle, or the heavy, apocalyptic deluge? You learn to tell the difference, and occasionally bet on the hour when the puddle in your corner will finally overflow and force Jenkins to relocate his mud library. You joke, you complain, you pretend to hate it less than you actually do. The rain never really stops, it just changes tactics. Sometimes it sneaks in sideways, sometimes it comes straight down, and sometimes it appears to be falling up. You surrender to it, not out of defeat, but as an act of solidarity with every other miserable, dripping soul beside you. And one day, when you finally get home, you will never, ever complain about a little drizzle again. You've been warned. Keep your feet dry, or risk the horrors of trench foot, a condition where your toes resemble soggy breadsticks and your socks stand up on their own. Every day, you swap stories about who has the worst case, as if comparing grotesque art at a very exclusive, very damp gallery. Trench foot is not just a problem, it's a daily preoccupation. The first time you hear about it, you think, how bad could it be? The answer, very, very bad. It's what happens when your feet marinate for days in cold, filthy water, wrapped in socks that could double as weapons of mass discomfort. After a few days, the skin goes pale, then waxy, then an exciting shade of purple-grey. If you're lucky, you get feeling back in your toes sometime before spring. If you're not, well, at least you'll save on toenail clippers. In theory, preventing trench foot is simple. Keep your feet dry and change your socks often. In practice, it's a full-time job. Dry socks are rarer than gold, and the only thing more valuable is a pair of boots that fits. You become a sock hoarder, a barterer of footcloths, willing to trade a week's supply of biscuits for one pair that doesn't crunch when you bend them. Jenkins claims he once swapped his last chocolate bar for a fresh sock, only to find it had already been claimed by a rat. That's the trenches for you, full of life lessons, all of them damp. Sock-changing ceremonies take place with the solemnity of ancient religious rites. You remove your boots with a wince, peel off a sock with the care of a bomb disposal expert, and examine the state of your toes. Sometimes it's not so bad, just a bit wrinkled, a little discolored. Other times, you find yourself staring in disbelief, wondering if you've somehow developed webbing overnight. You air your feet, shivering in the cold, and hope the fresh air will do something, anything. Occasionally, you wave your toes at Jenkins, who promptly accuses you of war crimes. The medics do their best. There's an official process. Elevate your feet, dry them, rub them with whale oil if you're lucky, and don't mind smelling like a shipwreck, and report to the dock if anything starts falling off. But the medics are swamped, and supplies are thin. Sometimes, treatment means a pat on the back and a heartfelt, tough luck, mate, before they send you back out to wade through the next puddle. Stories about trench foot circulate like urban legends. Someone swears they knew a guy who lost 3 toes in one night, just from standing still too long. Another claims trench foot gives you special powers, like the ability to sense water within a 50-meter radius, or to terrify new recruits with a single sock removal. One thing's for sure, Everyone who's spent more than a week in the mud is a reluctant member of the Trench Foot Club, and membership is definitely not optional. Modern foot care seems laughable compared to trench life. You fantasize about warm baths, plush slippers, and that gentle, cradling feeling of a heated floor. You make secret vows. If you survive, you'll never take dry feet for granted again. You'll air your toes in the sunshine every chance you get. You'll start a support group for socks. And yet, you persevere. You keep changing your socks, wringing them out, hanging them over tiny fires and praying they won't catch. You joke about your souvenirs, swap stories with your mates, and even hold impromptu contests for the worst foot of the month. Winner gets an extra biscuit, loser has to keep their boots on for another hour. In the grand lottery of trench life, trench foot is the prize nobody wants, but everyone seems to win. Someday, you'll look back on this and laugh. Probably. But right now, you just dream of warm, dry feet and a world where socks don't crunch when you put them on. Just when you think you can relax, the sergeant appears and yells something about readiness. Now you're standing in line, half asleep, pretending your rifle isn't secretly jammed with mud. The drills are endless, the instructions are vague, and the only certainty is that you'll do this all again tomorrow. It doesn't matter if it's raining, snowing, or if a rogue trench rat is staging a protest in the dugout. The sergeant believes every problem can be solved with a good, old-fashioned drill. You could be ankle-deep in water, your uniform glued to your body, your last shred of patience fluttering away on the breeze, and still, the rallying cry will ring out. Form up! Practice makes perfect. If perfection means synchronized yawning and near hypothermic fidgeting, then yes, you are the greatest fighting force on Earth. The process starts the same every time. Someone tries to sneak in a nap or a quiet smoke, maybe even a bite of something resembling food, when suddenly the alarm is sounded, sometimes a bell, sometimes just the sergeant's uniquely soul-piercing whistle. You and your fellow soldiers shuffle into formation like sleep-deprived penguins, rifles at varying degrees of cleanliness, boots squelching in what might generously be called soil. Jenkins, as always, is last in line, clutching his helmet at a jaunty angle, daring fate to notice. Drills are a mystery wrapped in an enigma, covered with a thin glaze of official procedure. Some days it's bayonet practice, stabbing imaginary enemies with all the enthusiasm of a hungover scarecrow. Other days, it's weapon inspection, which is a polite way for the sergeant to point out every last speck of mud, rust, and whatever else you've managed to acquire. Your rifle, which was theoretically designed for battle, has now become a test of your cleaning abilities. You scrape, you scrub, you curse under your breath, knowing full well that mud is both eternal and sentient. Then there's marching practice, because nothing says modern warfare like walking up and down the same 20 feet of trench while the sergeant critiques your posture. You learn to march, pivot, and salute while navigating puddles, duckboards, and Jenkins' outstretched feet. Someone always loses a boot to the mud, but the drill must go on. Sometimes, for variety, you get to practice rapid response, which mostly involves running in circles and pretending you know where you're going. Spoiler, you don't. If you're lucky, there's target practice, which means standing in a line, squinting at a battered tin can tied to a stick, and praying your rifle fires. The mud jams everything, and the one guy who manages to actually hit the target is lauded as a legend and offered the honorary clean spoon at dinner. The rest of you grumble, reload, and swear you were just testing the wind. The sergeant remains unconvinced. The worst part isn't even the activity itself, it's the endless repetition. You could recite the steps in your sleep, and, judging by Jenkins' performance, you sometimes do. The orders blur together. Present arms, fix bayonets, eyes front. Eventually, you tune out, dreaming of a world where the only drills are battery, powered and used for hanging picture frames. Morale during drills is a balancing act. You make faces behind the sergeant's back, invent new ways to stand at attention, and quietly compete to see who can look the most convincingly awake. There's always a whisper of hope that, just once, you'll be dismissed early. But no, like a bad rerun, it always ends the same way. The promise that tomorrow will be even sharper. Tomorrow, you suspect, will be exactly like today, muddy, repetitive, and entirely too early. At the end, you're released back into the trench, legs sore, pride battered, fingers numb. You wipe the mud from your boots, stash your rifle somewhere safe, as in not directly under the leak, and try to remember what relaxation feels like. You survived another drill. You'll do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. In the trenches, routine is king. Even if it's a king who loves waking you up before sunrise. Trench life is a sensory experience, mostly the bad kind. There's the perpetual reek of sweat, the occasional stench of rotting rations, and something that might be cheese, but nobody wants to investigate. You long for fresh air, but the only breeze brings the delicate perfume of the latrine. It's the kind of atmosphere that would get your local gym shut down, your favorite restaurant condemned, and your grandma's house declared a biohazard. The smells arrive in layers, wafting up from the mud, the uniforms and the collective despair of 100 men trying and failing to practice basic hygiene in what is essentially a glorified ditch. Let's start with the big ones. First up, sweat. Not your "I jogged a mile and now I feel accomplished" kind of sweat, but the deep, existential sort that soaks into every fiber of your uniform and refuses to leave. You sweat because you're cold. You sweat because you're nervous. You sweat because your boots have developed their own microclimate. The result is a stew of body odor that sticks to you like a clingy ex and makes you wonder if deodorant is just a rumor spread by the enemy. Then, the food. Army rations might look bland, but their smell is unforgettable. Open a tin of mystery meat, and you're greeted with a bouquet of brine, boiled fat, and that unshakable note of last Tuesday's disappointment. Biscuits, when not rock solid, can absorb trench humidity and develop their own unique bouquet, a scent reminiscent of wet cardboard left behind a radiator. The jam tries to cover it all up with a whiff of artificial berries, but it mostly just adds another confusing note to the orchestra of aromas. The cheese, if you can call it that, lurks at the bottom of ration boxes. Its origins are unknown, its intentions unclear. Some say it's a morale booster, others suspect it's a test of loyalty. It's hard, pungent, and resilient enough to survive trench conditions. Jenkins once tried using a chunk to plug a leak in the sandbags. The smell lingered for days, leading to the first and only unanimous vote to bury a ration rather than eat it. And then there's the latrine, the unavoidable centerpiece of the trench scent palette. No matter how many sandbags you stack, no matter how fiercely you wave the burlap curtain, the odor finds you. It's a living thing. Adapting to the weather, fragrant and warm on hot days, sharp and invigorating when the temperature drops. There are moments when the wind shifts, and for a fleeting second, you taste hope. Then the breeze changes, and hope is replaced by a nose-wrinkling reminder that you live, work, and sleep next to an open-air toilet. Add to all of this the little surprises: mold creeping up the wooden supports, socks that have achieved sentience, and the occasional whiff of gunpowder after a training drill. Sometimes the trench is briefly perfumed by someone lighting a cigarette or brewing tea, but even these are overpowered within moments. Private Jones tries to mask the general stench with a splash of aftershave. He's been rationing since basic training. It mixes with the trench aromas to produce something truly unforgettable, a scent that can only be described as optimism dashed upon the rocks of reality. If there is a silver lining, it's that you do get used to it. After a few weeks, your nose raises the white flag and simply stops sending urgent messages to your brain. You bond with your trench mates over whose boots smell the worst and trade stories of foul odors like war medals. It becomes a kind of in-joke. You know you've settled in when you can't tell if it's you, the rations, or Jenkins. Back home, the faintest hint of mildew might have sent you running for cleaning supplies. Now, You dream of soap, hot water, and the sharp cleansing scent of nothing at all. In the trenches, you're surrounded by the full spectrum of human and non-human aromas. And if you ever manage to escape this muddy purgatory, you know one thing for sure: you'll never complain about a gym locker room ever again. It's time to sleep. Or at least, it's time to lie down and hope nothing wakes you up. Artillery, footsteps, someone's alarmingly loud nightmares. Pick your poison. You roll over, try to get comfortable on your makeshift mattress, and pray that whatever's crawling in your blanket isn't carnivorous. In theory, sleep should be the great escape, a soft fade to black after a day of mud, drills, and the unique spiritual agony of army biscuits. In practice, it's more like a recurring bad date, awkward, disappointing, and constantly interrupted by unexpected noises. You lie there, staring at the low ceiling of the dugout or the grey canvas of a leaking tent, one ear tuned for distant gunfire, the other for Jenkins' nightly monologue about socks. No matter how tired you are, sleep stays just out of reach, lurking somewhere between the edge of your consciousness and the cold, damp trench wall. Your mattress is whatever you can scavenge: a bundle of spare coats, a pile of sandbags, or, if you're feeling fancy, the least wet corner of your bedroll. It smells faintly of mildew and strongly of everyone who slept on it before. You adjust, twist, and try to ignore the ominous squelch every time you shift your weight. Pillows are a fond memory, replaced by a rolled-up uniform jacket that's either rock-hard or suspiciously lumpy. The one time you tried using a helmet, you woke up with a new appreciation for chiropractors. The real challenge isn't even the comfort level, it's the soundtrack. The night is alive with the symphony of the trenches: boots squishing in mud, whispered arguments about whose turn it is to stand watch, the metallic scrape of someone cleaning a rifle for the 1000th time. And then there's the artillery. It could be far off or uncomfortably close, but it's always loud enough to jolt you out of even the deepest sleep. The first few nights, you jump at every bang. After a while, you just sigh, roll over, and mentally calculate how long you can pretend you didn't hear it before someone pokes you awake for your own shift. And let's not forget the creatures. Rats. Always with the rats, scurrying under duckboards, exploring your blanket, sometimes daring to snuggle up for warmth. Jenkins claims he made a deal with the king rat for uninterrupted sleep, but the rest of you aren't so lucky. If it's not rats, it's insects. Lice, fleas, the occasional spider. You become an expert at the midnight itch and swat routine. You stop being surprised when something with tiny feet runs across your toes. At this point, you're just happy if it doesn't bite. Sleep is divided into brief, fitful bursts, never deep, never enough. You might close your eyes for what feels like an hour, only to find 5 minutes have passed and it's your turn on sentry duty. Or, worse, you finally drift off, only to be woken by Jenkins practicing his trench snore, a sound so profound it once made a corporal consider requesting leave. Sometimes you wake up to someone shaking your shoulder, sometimes to the cold, sometimes to nothing at all except the nagging feeling that you missed something important. And yet, you adapt. You learn to nap with one eye open, to find moments of rest in the least likely places, a sunbeam cutting through the gloom, a rare quiet hour after the rain. You share sleep stories with your mates, swapping complaints and half-remembered dreams, building a camaraderie out of mutual exhaustion. Morning always comes too soon, dragging you from the shallow depths of trench sleep into another day of mud and monotony. You rub your eyes, stretch your aching back, and make a silent promise that tonight you'll sleep better. You won't, but hope springs eternal, even in a trench, even in your dreams, if you're lucky enough to catch them. Tonight, it's your turn on sentry duty. You pace the trench, clutching your rifle and straining to hear over the wind. Every shadow is suspicious, every noise a potential threat, or maybe just Jenkins sneaking out to pee again. The minutes crawl by, punctuated only by your heartbeat and the distant sound of someone losing at cards. Night in the trench is its own world, familiar but transformed. Darkness blurs the edges of reality, turning the mud walls into looming cliffs and every abandoned helmet into a lurking creature. You squint into the blackness, eyes watering from the cold and the effort of trying to distinguish friend from foe, rat from rock, actual danger from Jenkins' legendary bladder. The wind tugs at your collar, cold and insistent, carrying with it the subtle, ever-present sense of earth, sweat, and distant latrine. You remind yourself. You volunteered for this shift, probably in a moment of ill-advised optimism, or because you lost a bet. You march your little section of trench like a reluctant mall security guard, one foot after the other, boots squelching with each step. The rhythmic thud of your own heart is matched only by the occasional plop of water dripping from somewhere overhead, landing squarely down the back of your neck. You try not to think about the fact that, statistically, most of what lands on you in the trenches is not just water. Every sense is on high alert, sharpened by caffeine, nerves, and the gentle terror of knowing it's your job to notice if things suddenly go very wrong. You listen to the wind rattling the duckboards, the rustle of a rat exploring an abandoned ration tin, the whisper of someone muttering a card game curse in the next dugout over. The longer you stand, the more you're convinced you're hearing things that shouldn't be there. Distant footfalls, whispered German, or the unmistakable crunch of something moving just out of sight. Is it the enemy? Or just Jenkins, again with his bladder of legend? You consider issuing him a bell for safety. The hours pass slowly, every second stretching into eternity. Your mind starts to wander, filling the darkness with possibilities. You recall every rumor you've ever heard about surprise raids and silent infiltrations. Every flicker of movement becomes a test. Are you alert, or are you just tired? Is that shadow a helmet perched on a sandbag, or the start of a legendary ghost story Private Jones told after lights out? In the trench, even the most skeptical start to believe in ghosts, at least a little. It's either that, or admit you've been spooked by your own equipment. Again, you shuffle your weight, shifting the cold from one foot to the other, hands tight on your rifle, fingers numb. You find yourself talking quietly to the night, soft reassurances, a little nervous laughter, a low whistle to let the other sentries know you're still there. Jenkins answers with a discreet cough from somewhere nearby, the universal soldier's code for still here, still freezing, still not asleep. If you're lucky, you catch a glimpse of something beautiful, the moon peeking through a break in the clouds, silver light glinting off a puddle, stars scattered overhead like forgotten medals. For a moment, the world feels still, suspended in a rare and fragile peace. Then someone sneezes, or stubs a toe, or knocks over the kettle, and the spell is broken. The shift ends eventually. Someone comes to relieve you, an equally bleary-eyed comrade with a whispered all clear. You hand over the watch, grateful to shed your paranoia for a few hours, and shuffle back to your dugout. You flop down, exhausted, trying not to think about the next time your name will appear on the night watch roster. In the trenches, the night belongs to the watchful, the worried, and the wide awake. Sleep, when it comes, is sweeter for having been earned one cold, anxious minute at a time. It's dinner time. The cook serves up stew, which contains mysterious meat, 3 potatoes, and a floating object nobody identifies. The bread could be used for self-defense. You eat quickly, knowing the rats are watching, and that indigestion is almost guaranteed. The dinner bell, or rather, the cook's hoarse shout, calls you and your fellow soldiers to the food line, where anticipation wrestles with dread. The aroma is complex, layered with notes of burnt fat, boiled root vegetables, and a faint hint of defeat. You shuffle forward, mess tin in hand, prepared for whatever culinary experiment awaits. There are rumors that the cook was once a pastry chef back home. But here, his greatest achievement is making gravy that doesn't dissolve spoons. You reach the front of the queue. With a flourish, the cook ladles a generous scoop of the evening's stew into your tin. It lands with a splat and an ominous wobble. You spot a chunk of something, Could be beef, could be turnip, could be the unfortunate product of an army supply chain accident. There's a solitary potato slice, the color of exhaustion, floating beside a carrot that's seen better decades. Occasionally, there's a bonus, a small, rubbery mystery blob that everyone silently agrees not to discuss. Bread is handed out, 1 piece per man. It's dense, dry, and would make an excellent projectile in an emergency. There's always the temptation to keep it for self-defense, but hunger wins out. You gnaw on it, jaw muscles aching, and briefly wonder if the dentist back home can fix trench jaw. The best you can say is that it's filling, if only because it doesn't break down easily. Eating is not a social event in the trenches. It's an exercise in efficiency. You eat fast, shoveling stew into your mouth before it cools into a solid mass. The rats know the drill too. Their beady eyes shine in the firelight as they creep closer, waiting for the inevitable dropped morsel or the moment someone gets distracted by conversation. Jenkins claims he once saw a rat snatch bread right out of a man's hand, but you're pretty sure that's just his excuse for losing his rations again. Sometimes you're lucky, and there's a rare treat, a pinch of salt, a sprinkle of pepper, maybe a dab of ancient jam for dessert. The men celebrate these moments with the reverence normally reserved for holidays and letters from home. Private Jones once traded his only pair of dry socks for an extra potato. Nobody judged him. Conversations over dinner are brief and focused. The first topic, what do you think that floating thing was? Followed by a round of creative theories, none of them appetizing. Next comes a round of nostalgia, with everyone describing the best meal they ever had back home. You realize that no matter how bad your mother's meatloaf was, it never tried to escape the plate. After eating, you wash your tin with the least muddy water available, usually a shared bucket that's seen too many potatoes and not enough soap. The cleanup is quick and desperate. No one wants to leave anything edible for the rats, and nobody wants to linger around the cook in case he tries to recruit volunteers for potato detail. Indigestion is a given. You lie back, feeling the stew settle, and silently hope that tonight is not the night you discover the true meaning of intestinal fortitude. Sometimes you wish for a simple cup of tea, or just a meal where you don't have to negotiate with your food. Still, you endure. You share a knowing look with the men around you, a camaraderie built on mystery meat and mutual suffering. Someday, you tell yourself, you'll sit in a real kitchen with real food and bread that won't break your teeth. Until then, you eat quickly, you eat quietly, and you keep one eye on the rats, just in case they try to join you for dessert. The only thing more common than mud in the trench is gossip. Who's getting sent home? Is the war almost over? Did Jenkins really see a tank driven by a dog? None of it makes sense, but it passes the time and keeps your brain from dissolving into pure, uncut anxiety. Gossip is the true currency of trench life. Information flows through the dugouts faster than water through a leaky sandbag. One moment, you're trying to coax life back into your socks, and the next, you're drawn into a heated debate about whether the rations will finally include something green, or if the chaplain is secretly a chess champion in disguise. Everyone has a story, and everyone's a critic. If you thought office politics were intense, try surviving a winter surrounded by men armed with nothing but rumors and endless free time. There's the daily round of wild speculation. Someone's cousin's letter said the war would be over by Christmas, never mind that it's now April. Another bloke swears he overheard the quartermaster saying reinforcements are coming, along with crates of chocolate and real coffee. Sometimes the rumours are oddly specific, like Jenkins's infamous claim that he saw a French officer with 2 left boots, or that the sergeant once ate an entire tin of bully beef without blinking. It isn't just the wild stories, it's also the hopeful lies everyone tells themselves to get through another miserable day. We'll be rotated out soon. Tomorrow's weather will be sunny. The mud in this sector isn't as deep as last year. Nobody really believes it, but there's comfort in saying it out loud, as if repetition can make it true. Even the most skeptical find themselves sucked in, repeating tales with just enough enthusiasm to make you wonder if hope is, in fact, contagious. Some rumors serve a purpose. When morale gets low, someone will overhear that leave is being extended, or that a famous actress is visiting the front. These tales are told with a knowing wink. No one expects them to be true, but for a moment, it feels good to pretend. Private Jones, the unofficial rumor king, claims his uncle sent him a letter describing a new invention called the portable bath. Nobody buys it, but we all want to. Of course, with every batch of gossip comes a healthy dose of skepticism. You learn to take every story with a grain of salt, or, if salt is running low, with a handful of mud. There are always competing versions, retold and reshaped, until the original truth is completely unrecognizable. You play a daily game of telephone, where a lost shipment of boots quickly becomes an epic tale of a supply train ambushed by wild boars. And then there are the cautionary tales, whispered warnings of doom. Someone heard that sleeping with your boots off invites trench foot. Another says the rats can smell your fear and will target you next. The medical officer supposedly carries a lucky rabbit's foot, but no one has ever seen it. Jenkins insists that if you whistle after sundown, you'll attract enemy snipers and guarantee rain for the next week. Better safe than sorry. When the day's chores are done, men huddle in corners, swapping stories and survival lies as if trading baseball cards. Each tale is bigger, bolder, and more ridiculous than the last. Laughter bubbles up, breaking through the monotony. The tension eases, if only for a few minutes. You know most of it isn't true, but it doesn't matter. In the trenches, truth is less important than entertainment and hope. Tomorrow, the rumors will be different, but the effect will be the same. Gossip is the glue that holds the line together, a little spark of absurdity in a world that desperately needs it. And if someone says they saw a tank driven by a dog, well, you might just nod along. Stranger things have happened out here. Personal hygiene is ambitious. Shaving with cold water is like medieval torture. Changing socks is a cause for celebration. If you find a dry towel, you consider it a relic. You'd kill for a bar of soap and a locked bathroom. Trench life has redefined your relationship with cleanliness. Once, you worried about things like fresh breath and good hair days. Now, you're just hoping that whatever is living under your fingernails isn't planning to unionize. Showers are a fond, misty memory, something you recall from a previous life, like reliable public transport or freshly laundered sheets. Here, cleanliness isn't next to godliness. It's several zip codes away and can only be reached by ferry. Let's start with washing. Water is everywhere in the trenches, except, of course, where you need it, in a warm, private bath. Instead, you're forced to freshen up with what passes for clean water, rain collected in rusty tins, a dribble from a battered canteen, or the dubious puddle you're pretty sure Jenkins used to soak his socks. You splash your face, grit your teeth, and try not to think about where the water came from. Any attempt at a proper wash leaves you just as muddy, but now cold and wet too. Shaving is an ordeal. If you're lucky, you have a blunt razor and a mug of lukewarm water that's more soup than liquid. If not, it's a dry scrape in a cracked mirror, squinting at your reflection in the morning fog and wondering who let the wild man in. Nicks, cuts, and creative swearing are standard. Jenkins swears he hasn't shaved since deployment and is now considering entering witness protection as a Yeti. Your teeth? Army-issued toothbrushes are as stiff as the bread, and toothpaste is whatever powder or soap is available. You swirl your mouth with questionable water, try to ignore the flavor of mud, and hope for the best. Dental hygiene is mostly about lowering your standards and praying you don't chip a tooth on breakfast. Changing your socks is the true high point of the hygiene routine. Dry socks are currency, status symbol, and religious experience all at once. You air your feet in the sun, if it ever shines, and put on your least damp pair with something like reverence. Jenkins claims to have invented a rotation system, but it mostly involves drying socks over a candle and filling the dugout with the scent of burning wool and dashed hopes. Soap is a legendary artifact, rumoured to exist but rarely seen. If you get your hands on a bar, you guard it like treasure. Lathering up with actual suds feels like a day at the spa. If the spa was held in a drafty hole, surrounded by 50 of your closest, dirtiest friends. Baths are mythical, reserved for the luckiest soldiers on leave. The rest of you settle for a full-body wipe-down with a damp rag and a lot of determination. Laundry is a group project and a comedy of errors. You boil your uniform in a battered pot, stir it with a stick, and hope for the best. Half the time, you just rinse out the mud and put it back on. Clean becomes a sliding scale. If your shirt is less stiff than the last time, you count that as a win. The fresh scent of soap is replaced by the earthy aroma of, well, it's not as bad as Jenkins. Despite it all, you do what you can. You trade for a comb, barter for a scrap of towel, and invent new ways to feel almost human. You take pride in the little things, a clean face, trimmed nails, socks that don't crunch. It's not much, but it's enough to remind you there's a world beyond the mud and misery. A world where hot water, privacy, and soap are not just dreams. And until then, you carry on, scruffy, scrappy, and surprisingly resilient, even if your reflection wouldn't recognize you anymore. Boredom is dangerous, so you fill the hours with endless games of cards, creative dares, and, on particularly desperate nights, inventing new rules for who can find the driest spot. Spoiler, nobody wins. The human mind, it turns out, will do almost anything to escape monotony, even if it means creating a championship in who can stare at a wall the longest. The day is punctuated by long stretches of not much, interrupted only by food, drills, or the occasional unexpected visit from the local rat king. In those gaps, your brain craves distraction, so you and your mates turn to the timeless traditions of mischief, gambling, and contests with stakes far higher than logic would ever recommend. The classic is, of course, cards. A deck of battered, mud-stained playing cards circulates the trench like ancient currency. Sometimes there are whole packs. Sometimes you have to make do with 37 cards and a joker that someone drew on a scrap of bandage. The games themselves vary. Poker, rummy, trench blackjack, or a local favourite called Don't Let Jenkins Deal. Nobody actually remembers all the rules, but it doesn't matter. Winning means everything, even if the grand prize is an extra biscuit or, on rare occasions, the right to swap your next turn at night watch. When cards lose their magic, you get creative. Dice games appear, with some soldiers carving their own out of bits of bone or wood. Gambling is inevitable. Cigarettes, socks, a square inch of dry newspaper. Jenkins once tried to bet his right boot, but everyone agreed he'd have to throw in his ration of jam for it to be a fair trade. Arguments over cheating are loud, but brief, usually resolved by laughter or by someone accusing the rats of stacking the odds. If luck and skill games grow stale, it's time for dares and challenges. Someone bets you can't hop from one end of the trench to the other without touching the ground. A feat made nearly impossible by the fact that the ground is mostly mud and despair. There are feats of strength, who can carry the most sandbags before collapsing, endurance, who can hold a plank position the longest before sinking, and, of course, culinary bravery, who can eat the most cheese in one sitting without passing out. On the truly slow days, new games are invented. Who can spot the general's clean boots first becomes a competitive sport, as does guess that smell and name that leak. There's also a running competition for the best trench art, drawing rude caricatures in the mud or sculpting miniature statues from spent bullet casings and bits of string. Creativity thrives in the strangest places, especially when the only alternative is cataloguing the contents of Jenkins' mysterious sock drawer. Music and performance aren't left out. Someone always has a harmonica, battered but beloved, and there's usually an aspiring singer ready to serenade the squad with off-key renditions of popular tunes. Impromptu talent shows spring up, featuring everything from terrible poetry to interpretive dances inspired by dodging mortar fire. Even the rats get in on the action, staging races across the duckboards, and occasionally being cheered on by the most desperate gamblers. But beneath all the jokes and bets, games are more than just a way to kill time. They're survival tools. They keep your mind sharp, your spirits up, and remind you that, even in the bleakest moments, you're surrounded by people as bored and absurd as you are. The laughter that bubbles up after a particularly ridiculous round of who can find the driest spot isn't just noise, it's a lifeline, a defiant little spark in the gloom. Someday, when you're back in a place with real floors and actual entertainment, you'll tell these stories. You'll remember that time Jenkins swore he'd beaten the unbeatable rat, or the night you won the last dry matchstick with a royal flush. And you'll know that if you can survive a week of trench boredom, you can survive just about anything. You hear the phrase, shell shock, whispered between the older men. You try not to think about it, but every time an artillery shell lands too close, your hands shake and your brain feels like a scrambled radio. It's the kind of fear you can't joke away, but you try anyway. At first, you imagine shell shock as something that happens to other people. Older soldiers, those who've spent years in the mud, or maybe the quiet types who sit at the edge of the group, smoking and staring at nothing. But as the weeks roll on, and the nights are split by thunderous barrages, you notice it creeping closer. It starts as a jump at a sudden noise, a tightening in your chest whenever the ground shudders beneath you, a night where sleep stays just out of reach because your ears keep searching for the next explosion. The trenches are never silent. Even when the guns fall quiet, there's always a background hum. Boots shuffling, men murmuring, rats chewing, but it's the artillery that dominates. Each shell arrives with its own signature, a distant rumble, a whistling crescendo, and then the world shatters into chaos. Earth, shrapnel, fear. When it's close, you feel the shockwave in your bones, as if someone grabbed you by the spine and shook you like a snow globe. There's a routine to coping. You dig deeper, pull your helmet low, and squeeze your eyes shut until the noise passes. Some men mutter prayers, others curse loudly, and a few try to pretend it's all just a bad joke. Was that the same shell as last night? Or has Jerry upgraded to surround sound? Jenkins claims he can tell the difference between British and German artillery by the way the mud splatters. Nobody believes him. But you appreciate the effort. You notice subtle changes in yourself and your mates. Hands that tremble for no reason, tempers fraying over small things, voices growing quiet when the talk turns to last night's barrage. Some men start to avoid certain spots in the trench, places where the earth still smells of explosives or where the walls are pitted with fresh craters. There's a special look in the eyes of those who've been through too much, a glazed, distant stare that says, "I'm here, but a part of me is somewhere else." Everyone has their own way of coping. Some write letters obsessively, as if putting pen to paper will build a wall between them and the shells. Others throw themselves into routine, cleaning rifles, checking gear, volunteering for extra watch shifts. Anything to keep busy, to keep from thinking. The bravest, or perhaps the most desperate, try to joke about it. If the shells don't get you, Jenkins' snoring will. Laughter comes in short, nervous bursts, but it helps, a pressure valve in a world where pressure is constant. You hear stories about men sent home, their minds so battered by the endless bombardment that they flinch at every loud sound. The term shell shock floats through the air. Part diagnosis, part warning, part unspoken fear. The medics do what they can, rest, quiet, a sympathetic ear, but there's no real cure out here. The best you can hope for is a little understanding, a friend who doesn't laugh when you jump at thunder, or a night where the guns stay silent long enough for you to remember what peace feels like. As the days pass, you learn to spot the signs. You become kinder to your fellow soldiers, more forgiving of strange habits and midnight anxieties. You learn that survival isn't just about dodging shrapnel. It's about finding ways to hold on to yourself when the world wants to shake you apart. Someday, the noise will stop. Someday, you'll walk on grass instead of mud and realize how silent peace can be. Until then, you keep moving forward, hands shaking, jokes at the ready, holding tight to the hope that you and your friends can make it through together. In the trenches, sometimes that hope and a little laughter is all that stands between you and the dark. Supplies have arrived. This means standing in a long, muddy line to receive new boots, 2 sizes wrong, a can of beans, and, if you're lucky, some chocolate. The quartermaster's smile is as rare as dry matches. Resupply day in the trenches is an event, though not in the festive sense. There are no balloons, no cake, and the only music is the impatient shuffling of boots in sticky mud. It starts with a rumour. Someone saw a wagon. Someone heard the engine of a lorry. Before long, word spreads like wildfire and a horde of soldiers materializes, clutching ration cards and whispering hopeful prayers for socks that aren't already developing life forms. You join the queue, as much a ritual as anything else in trench life. The line snakes around the bend, men shifting from foot to stay warm, or just to keep circulation going in the vague hope their toes are still attached. The mood is a mix of anticipation and low expectations. You joke about what you might get, perhaps a single glove, or, dare to dream, a bar of actual soap. The real veterans are stoic, having seen too many resupply days end in tragedy, usually involving a crate of split peas and a missing shipment of socks. The quartermaster's domain is sacred ground, ruled by a complex system of paperwork, suspicion, and the careful hoarding of anything remotely desirable. His uniform is always just a little cleaner than everyone else's, his expression set to permanent skepticism. If he smiles at you, check your boots, he's probably run out of everything. One by one, the line shuffles forward. Jenkins is in front of you, already rehearsing his sob story for why he needs an extra pair of boots. You mentally prepare your own case. Your last pair has a hole so large you could smuggle a rat through it, and you're down to half a bar of soap that's mostly just memory. The trick is to look both desperate and resigned, as though you know you don't deserve new supplies but are willing to be disappointed anyway. Finally, it's your turn. The quartermaster greets you with the enthusiasm of a man who's been asked to explain why the rations always smell like despair. He consults his list, eyes you with suspicion, and slides over a can of beans, a new pair of boots, 2 sizes off, as promised, and, in a rare stroke of fortune, a small square of chocolate wrapped in what might once have been foil. You try not to look too excited. The trick to surviving the trenches, after all, is to never let hope show on your face. It just makes you a target for the universe. You move aside, clutching your bounty. The can of beans is dented, but, by trench standards, practically gourmet. The chocolate is carefully stashed away, a treasure to be rationed out one tiny bite at a time, or maybe traded later for a few minutes with someone's newspaper. Or, if you're desperate, a dry pair of socks. Resupply day isn't just about getting things, it's about the drama. The stories that start here will last all week. Jenkins' ongoing feud with the quartermaster, Private Jones's legendary soap haul, the time the beans exploded in someone's pack, leaving a trail that would have impressed Hansel and Gretel. Someone always claims they saw a new kind of ration, something mysterious and probably mythical. Lemon pudding, whispers Jenkins, eyes wide. In a tin. Everyone laughs, but for a brief moment, you all believe. Once the line disperses, there's a great unpacking and trading session, half economics lesson, half comedy show. Some men swap boots, others argue over who got the best can of beans, and the rare winner of the chocolate lottery becomes the most popular man in the trench. It's not glamorous, but for a few hours, Resupply Day gives you something to look forward to, proof that, even in the mud and misery, the outside world still exists. And, just maybe, next time you'll get a bar of soap that isn't shaped like a potato, but you're not holding your breath. Not in this air, anyway. It's not just rats, frogs, lice, and a swarm of aggressive beetles have taken up residence in your home. You make peace with the frogs, despise the lice, and grudgingly accept that the beetles are here for the long haul. After a few weeks in the trench, you realize you're not just fighting the enemy, you're also hosting a kind of pop-up zoo. The trenches, it turns out, are prime real estate for all sorts of wildlife who seem just as invested in the war effort as you are. The rats get all the glory, but they're only the tip of the animal iceberg. Soon, you're sharing your muddy, cramped quarters with a whole cast of characters. Frogs are the least offensive of the lot. In fact, you develop a kind of grudging respect for them. They move in whenever the trench floods, so basically always. You startle them with your boots, they startle you with their enthusiastic leaps, and before long, it's a nightly ritual. Who can spot the most frogs hiding in boots, helmets, or Jenkins' abandoned mess tin? Private Jones swears his frog roommate brings good luck, and Jenkins tries to train his to catch flies, with mixed success. The frogs don't seem to mind you. Maybe they recognize a fellow survivor when they see one. Then there's the lice. The official army guide refers to them as body lice, but you know them simply as the itch that never sleeps. No amount of boiling, scrubbing, or cursing can truly banish them. They lurk in every seam, every fold of cloth, staging midnight feasts that leave you scratching like a dog in allergy season. You swap stories about how to get rid of them. Some say cold baths, some say hot ones, some just accept their fate and start naming their lice as trench pets. There's always a guy who swears his lice can march in formation. The beetles, well, they're a force of nature. They arrive in waves, black shells gleaming, undeterred by rain or mud. Some are harmless, some bite, and a few are so large you suspect they're evolving to fill the power vacuum left by the missing brass. You discover quickly that beetles are unimpressed by military discipline. They'll crawl through a parade, hitch a ride on your boot, or, most annoyingly, take up residence in your spare socks. Jenkins claims the beetles respect him because he once saved one from drowning. The rest of you are not so lucky. Beetle evictions become a daily chore. And then there are the truly unexpected guests. Spiders, for one, weaving intricate webs between sandbags, determined to catch whatever passes for flying food in the trenches. Some men scream, others shrug, but everyone agrees the spiders are on your side. After all, anything that eats lice or mosquitoes is a friend. Sometimes you even see birds swooping overhead, diving for a meal, or just trying to understand what kind of strange, muddy circus has taken over their territory. There's a certain logic to all this. In a world where even the simplest comforts are rationed, you learn to appreciate whatever company you can get. Frogs are tolerated, even celebrated for their bug-hunting abilities. The lice are despised, but also inevitable. Your constant, itchy reminder that luxury is a hot bath and a clean shirt. The beetles, meanwhile, become reluctant mascots. Their glossy backs a small distraction from bigger worries. You joke about it, of course. If the enemy doesn't get us, the lice will. This is the only platoon with a frog battalion. We should start charging rent to the wildlife. The humor keeps you sane, and the company, however scaly or six-legged, reminds you you're not alone in the muck. Everyone here, animal or human, is just trying to survive another day. So, you settle into the bizarre reality of trench life, sharing your rations with the frogs, defending your socks from beetles, and scratching your head at the lice, literally. And someday, when you look back on it all, you might just find yourself missing your amphibian, insect, and eight-legged roommates, though probably not the lice. You form close bonds quickly, because tomorrow isn't promised. You joke, you argue, you share secrets you wouldn't tell your mother. Sometimes, someone doesn't make it through the night, and nobody talks about it, but everyone feels the absence. There's something about trench life that accelerates everything. You meet a stranger in the morning, and by evening you know the name of his dog, his favorite meal, and the one thing he'd do if he ever got home. Privacy dissolves in the mud. You sleep in rows like mismatched sardines, eat from the same battered pots, and look out for each other in the ways that matter. Passing dry socks, covering for a mate who needs a nap, sharing the last square of chocolate as if it's the crown jewels. Friendship in the trenches is not optional. It's as necessary as boots and rations, more even. You find yourself confiding things you never said out loud before. The trenches are a place where a bloke from Manchester and a farm kid from Kent can become family in the span of a week. Rivalries from home are forgotten. Here, the only competition is who can snore the loudest or tell the best story about surviving breakfast stew. At night, you whisper jokes and swap memories to chase away the dark. Someone always tries to one-up the others. My mum makes the best apple pie. My sister once set the house on fire, trying to fry an egg. I saw Jenkins lose a race to a rat, twice. There's an art to it, an unspoken contest to keep the laughter going just a little longer. Laughter becomes armor, thin but real. You look out for each other in ways you never expected. When Jenkins gets a letter from home, you're the first to hear the news, good or bad. If someone's feeling low, the whole group rallies. One offers tea, another hands over a lucky charm, someone else just sits close in the silence. There are no therapists in the trenches, but there are mates with ears and time to spare. Sometimes, the bonds you form are bittersweet. You might not even know a friend's first name until weeks in. Everyone goes by nicknames or last names, the kinds that stick to your soul more than mud sticks to boots. You invent new names, some affectionate, some ridiculous, and each carries a story. Scouse, Sparrow, Big Tom. Every name is a marker in the shifting landscape of memory. Of course, loss is part of the deal. There are nights when someone simply isn't there at roll call, and the space beside you feels hollow. There's no ceremony, just a heavy quiet. Maybe someone says a prayer, maybe not. But everyone feels the absence, a shape in the group that can't be filled, a story left half told. The next day, you go on. You have to. That's how the trenches work. Mourning in silence, supporting each other with a squeeze of the shoulder, a spare biscuit, or just the comfort of company. And yet, hope persists. You talk about the future in vague terms, always using when instead of if. When the war is over, when you're back home, when you'll see everyone again, alive and whole and maybe even clean. It's a promise you all keep, even if you know it's one you might not be able to keep. In the end, it's the friendships that save you, again and again, in ways big and small. The trenches teach you that people can be ridiculous, brave, stubborn, and kind, often all at once. You might lose friends, but you carry their stories with you, tucked in beside the dry socks and letters from home. And you know, as you drift off to uneasy sleep, that tomorrow you'll wake up surrounded by brothers. Muddy, exhausted, often infuriating brothers, but brothers just the same. The sky lights up, the ground shakes, and suddenly everyone is an expert in duck and cover. You recite silent prayers, try to remember why you're here, and hope the next shell lands somewhere else. When it's over, you crawl out, heart hammering, and laugh at Jenkins' new mud mask. Artillery, you quickly learn, is the world's most effective alarm clock. You don't just wake up. You're launched into consciousness with every nerve buzzing as the night explodes in light, noise, and the kind of vibration you'd expect from an earthquake hosted by a very angry giant. There's no grace period, no snooze button, just a mad scramble for helmets, cover, and the illusion of control. Everyone has a routine. The seasoned veterans don't even flinch anymore. They pull their coats tighter, grunt something about just another Tuesday, and keep their heads down. The rest of you? It's a ballet of panic and bravado. Ducking behind sandbags, pressing your face into the cold mud, muttering curses or prayers, or both, depending on the hour and your level of optimism. Jenkins, as always, narrates the experience in real time. That one was close. Closer than yesterday. Anyone else smell burnt toast? The tension breaks a little as you all try to pretend it's just another minor inconvenience, like a mosquito, but louder and slightly more explosive. It's amazing how quickly bravery becomes a group performance. You lock eyes with the man beside you, each silently daring the other to be the first to admit they're scared. Nobody wants to be the one who cracks. You make jokes about how duck and cover will be the next Olympic sport, or that you'll patent your new invention, the portable personal foxhole. Someone even suggests using Jenkins' muddy face as camouflage for the next drill. The truth, though, is always there. You're scared. Everyone is. You grip your rifle with clammy hands, heart thudding so loud you're sure the enemy can hear it. The world shrinks down to the patch of ground you're hugging and the endless, patient wait for the barrage to pass. You recite the rules in your head. Keep your helmet on, mouth slightly open to save your eardrums. And whatever you do, don't look up until the shelling stops. There's comfort in the ritual, in having something to do, anything really, to keep your mind busy while the world roars overhead. The aftermath is always the same. Silence falls, thick and heavy, broken only by nervous laughter and groans as everyone checks themselves for new holes. You look around, half in disbelief that you're still in one piece. Jenkins emerges from a puddle, covered from head to toe in fresh mud, looking like a creature from the bogs. You laugh, everyone does, because what else can you do? You compare mud patterns, award prizes for best impersonation of a swamp monster, and trade stories about the time someone allegedly finished their tea during a shelling. Underneath the bravado, though, there's a quiet relief. You made it through another round. You take a shaky breath, promise yourself you'll write a letter home, again. And maybe even let yourself dream about a future without bombs, mud, or Jenkins' enthusiastic updates on his collection of shrapnel souvenirs. You never really get used to the fear. It lurks at the edge of every joke, every game, every attempt at sleep. But you learn to carry it, to share it, to hide it under layers of mud, humour, and the company of men who know exactly what you're feeling. Bravery in the trenches is mostly about pretending, and maybe that's enough. After all, if you can't laugh at Jenkins' mud mask, the war wins, and you refuse to let it have that much. So you carry on, heart still racing, knowing you'll have to act brave again soon. It's an art form, and like everything else in the trenches, you get better at it the longer you survive. Every day ends the same way, talking about home. About meals that don't crunch, beds that don't squelch, and a future where mud is just something you garden in. It feels impossibly far away, but you cling to it all the same. These conversations become the unofficial evening ritual. After a long day of mud, drills, and dodging both shells and Jenkins's latest culinary experiment, you and your trenchmates gather in whatever dry patch you can find. Sometimes beneath a makeshift shelter of battered canvas, sometimes just shoulder to shoulder in the dugout, steam rising from mugs of tea that taste suspiciously of yesterday's socks. You go round the group, trading stories and dreams as if they're the rarest rations. Jenkins wants a proper bath. Not just a splash with cold water in a battered tin, but a real soak-until-you-prune clouds of steam bath. Private Jones, the aspiring chef, talks about breakfast, eggs and toast, sausages, coffee that is an army issue, and jam that spreads without breaking the bread. Someone else dreams of a pub, the laughter of friends, a night spent arguing about football instead of counting the seconds between artillery shells. Home, in these conversations, is both a place and a state of mind. It's clean sheets, a fire in the hearth, the smell of something baking in the kitchen. It's the little routines you never knew you'd miss. Shoes by the door, the click of the kettle, the soft creak of floorboards that haven't been flattened by 1,000 muddy boots. Even the annoying things take on a nostalgic glow, nagging about chores, the neighbour's dog barking, the rattle of the morning paper. Anything to remind you that life is out there, waiting for you to step back into it. Sometimes you let yourself imagine the moment you arrive. Maybe you'll run down the street, mud and all, just to see your family again. Maybe you'll sit in your favourite chair, close your eyes, and just breathe. The luxury of not having to share everything, from biscuits to secrets, To just be alone in a quiet, safe room feels like winning the lottery. Jenkins swears he'll never complain about a rainy Sunday again. You vow to plant a garden and grow something that isn't mold. Of course, reality is always there at the edge of your thoughts. You know home won't be exactly the same, that you'll carry pieces of the trench with you long after the mud has washed off. Some things can't be left behind, but still, you hold on to hope. It's stitched into every letter from home, every scrap of newspaper, every story about what you'll do when this is all over. Hope is what gets you up each morning and what helps you sleep at night, even when the ground is cold and the rats are restless. The dreams get you through the long, dark nights. They give you something to look forward to, beyond the next meal, the next drill, the next muddy morning. And sometimes, just sometimes, you wake from a dream of home and for a few seconds, forget where you are. The world is soft and quiet, the air is clean, and you are safe. In the end, you realize that the thing keeping everyone going isn't just duty, or courage, or even the hope of chocolate in the next ration. It's the shared belief that someday you'll wake up in a world where boots are dry, meals are hot, and mud is exactly where it belongs, outside, far away, part of a memory you survived. Until that day comes, you'll keep dreaming. Because sometimes, dreams are the only thing stronger than mud. It's morning. The sun rises, weak and watery. You've survived another night, against all odds. You drink your lukewarm tea, toast your survival with whatever's left of your biscuit, and wonder how anyone, anywhere, could possibly romanticize this. The first light creeps over the trench, revealing a landscape that manages to look even worse than it felt at midnight. Mud gleams in the low sun like fresh concrete poured for reasons no architect could justify. Boots squelch. Steam rises from 100 mugs of tea, the smell somewhere between damp leaves and last week's laundry. Jenkins claims he can taste the sunrise in his tea. The rest of you assume it's just the pond water, finally settling. Dawn patrol isn't for the faint-hearted, or the well-rested, for that matter. The routine is simple. You and your mates climb out of your burrows, rubbing the sleep from your eyes and untangling yourselves from whatever assortment of coats, blankets, and small mammals you collected during the night. The sergeant gives you the once-over, muttering something about fresh faces while trying not to step in anything alive or previously alive. There's a peculiar energy at sunrise. It's not quite hope, but it's close. The darkness is lifting. The shelling has paused, for now, and you take a moment to stretch, breathe, and remember what it's like to see the world in color again. It's not a glamorous sight. Faces smudged with mud, eyes rimmed red, uniforms wilting with overnight moisture. If a portrait artist wandered through the trench, they'd run screaming. Or ask you to pose for a series called Exhaustion in Sepia. Patrol itself is the trench version of a morning stroll. If your usual stroll involves stepping over broken duckboards, dodging puddles the size of bathtubs, and squinting at the horizon for any sign of enemy movement, you peer through binoculars that have fogged up in the damp, making everything look slightly more mysterious and significantly less threatening. You listen for sounds that don't belong, all the while trying to ignore the internal soundtrack of your stomach complaining about breakfast. You check the sandbags, count the supplies, and make sure Jenkins hasn't wandered off again in search of a mythical dry spot. There's always a moment of suspense as you scan the enemy lines, unsure if today will be the day something happens, or if it'll be another round of boredom broken only by the drama of someone losing their last cigarette to the mud. Occasionally, there's a sense of camaraderie in the morning air. You and your patrol mates joke about the night's adventures, who snored loudest, who talked in their sleep, who invented the new record for most socks changed in a night. Laughter is quieter in the morning, but it's real. It's the sound of men still here, still together, still winning tiny victories over exhaustion and cold. Back at your dugout, the post-patrol celebration is subdued. You share what little food you have, warming your hands on mugs that never seem to hold heat for long. Someone tries to toast to another day survived, but the toast crumbles halfway up. You eat it anyway. Jenkins finds a crumb in his pocket and declares it breakfast dessert. For a moment, you almost believe this could be normal life, just a group of friends sharing sunrise and stale biscuits. You take a final look at the sunrise, pale but stubborn, and remind yourself that even in the worst places, the world keeps turning. Birds still sing, frogs still croak, and every so often the clouds break just enough to let a little warmth reach your face. It's not much, but it's enough. So you carry on, shoulders hunched, eyes blinking against the light. One more morning survived. And as you set out for the day's duties, mud drills, and a fresh round of breakfast stew, you tell yourself the same thing you always do. As long as you see the sun, you're winning, even if it's only just peeking through the fog. It starts innocently enough, just a chill on your toes, maybe a faint squish when you walk. But soon, you realize you're out of clean, dry socks, and the quartermaster is hoarding them like gold at the end of the rainbow. You contemplate making socks from sandbags or, in a moment of desperation, just wrapping your feet in yesterday's newspaper, if only you had one. The horror stories circulate. The guy who tried drying his socks over a candle and now has one less toe. In the trenches, sock management is a science, an art, and a tragic farce. Socks are more than clothing here. They're currency, status symbol, and survival tool rolled into one damp, slightly moldy package. You find yourself dreaming of dry socks the way some men dream of Paris or proper jam. Every day, you check your personal stash, counting them like a dragon counting jewels. 1 pair, 2 pairs, and wait, is that one even a sock, or just a threadbare suggestion? You sniff it, instantly regret the decision, and place it back in the emergency-only pile. The drama begins each morning. You peel off yesterday's pair, a little afraid of what you'll find. Sometimes they're only a bit damp. Other times they're so saturated you consider wringing them out into your tea for added flavor. Changing socks is an event. It requires privacy, ceremony, and at least 3 prayers to the saints of dry feet. Jenkins claims he once saw his own socks grow legs and attempt to escape. Nobody blames them. There's fierce competition for new pairs. When the rumor spreads that the quartermaster has received a shipment of fresh socks, men appear out of the mud like mushrooms after rain. The queue forms instantly, a tense standoff where bribes, threats, and outright begging are fair game. The quartermaster, perched atop his hoard like a grumpy dragon, doles out socks with the cold impartiality of fate. You practice your most pitiful look, but deep down, you know today's bounty will go to whoever has the biggest hole in their current pair, or the best story. If, by some miracle, you get your hands on a dry pair, you guard them with your life. You air them out, stuff them into your shirt for warmth, and check them every hour to make sure Jenkins hasn't swapped them for his experimental trench slippers, which are, for the record, 2 sandbags and a prayer. You develop elaborate drying rituals, tying them to a stick over the fire, hanging them from the dugout ceiling, or waving them around in the rare moments of sunshine, like laundry flags signaling surrender to the mud. Of course, the universe is against you. It rains, socks get soaked, fires go out, and you're back to square one. Some men try clever inventions, improvised waterproof covers made from ration tins, or shoes crafted out of scavenged canvas and wishful thinking. Others just give up, stuffing their feet back into boots with a resigned sigh and a quiet apology to their toes. And then there are the stories. The legend of Stinky Pete, who wore the same pair for a month and was last seen being chased by an angry rat. Or the time Private Jones tried to barter his entire lunch for half a sock and got swindled by Jenkins, who sold him a glove instead. The warnings are everywhere. Change your socks or lose your feet. Dry your socks or the medics will use you for trench foot demonstrations. You laugh, but you also check your toes, just in case. In the grand scheme of trench suffering, The sock shortage is both ridiculous and deadly serious. You adapt, improvise, and pray for a resupply day that brings more than beans and broken promises. Until then, you manage as best you can, grateful for any moment when your feet feel dry, even if it's only in your dreams. Because in the trenches, hope comes in pairs, and it's always one sock short. Mail call is the one time the whole platoon moves faster than the speed of despair. You gather, shivering and hopeful, as the letters are handed out, sometimes from loved ones, sometimes from a government official who can't spell your name. Every letter is a lifeline, a reminder of a world with bathtubs, normal food, and people who aren't named Jenkins. But hope is a double-edged bayonet. Some days, all you get is a bill from the gas company or a letter from your cousin asking if you've won yet. At least it's not another sock requisition form. It begins with a distant shout, "Mail up!" and suddenly the trench is full of life. Boots thumping, helmets askew, faces alight with the hope of news from anywhere but here. The cook abandons his ladle, Jenkins appears out of thin air, and even the sergeant walks a bit faster. For a moment, everyone is 10 years younger, jostling for a spot near the mailbag, like children around a birthday cake. The mail itself is a battered pile of envelopes, some perfumed, some crumpled, some so waterlogged you need a degree in cryptology to read them. The mail clerk stands on a crate and starts calling out names. Each name is a tiny victory or a new wound, depending on whether or not you hear yours. You listen with the same tension you'd reserve for a lottery draw, knowing your luck is always questionable, but daring to hope anyway. When your name is called, you try to play it cool, but your hands betray you, shaking, clumsy, greedy for whatever's inside. The envelope might smell of lavender, onions, or just trench. The writing might be a mother's careful hand, a lover's hurried scrawl, or the grand, looping signature of your uncle who always insists on including an inspirational quote. Sometimes there's a newspaper clipping, sometimes a drawing from a little brother, sometimes a pressed flower that's seen better days but still makes your heart ache. Reading the letter is an event. You find a semi-private spot, squinting at the words in the weak light, hungry for the smallest scrap of normalcy. Home is alive in these pages. Rain on windows, the neighbour's dog, someone's new job, stories of meals with courses, cutlery and napkins that aren't made of yesterday's ration wrapper. Every sentence is a bridge to a life you're desperate to remember and terrified you'll forget. But hope, as always, is tricky. Not every letter brings comfort. Sometimes it's a form letter from the ministry, full of cheery bureaucratic nonsense and assurances that the situation is well in hand. Sometimes it's a bill forwarded with the efficiency of a guilt-ridden postal worker who's never seen mud in his life. Worst of all are the letters that never come, the birthday missed, the holiday unmarked, the silence from someone you wish would write, even if it's just to complain about the weather. There's a strange etiquette around bad mail. Nobody asks if you didn't get anything. Nobody pushes when you fold up a letter a little too fast or stare at the page without really reading. The jokes come out, softer this time. No news is good news. Or maybe your dog finally learned to write. You nod, tuck the letter away, and pretend it's enough. Jenkins, for all his faults, offers you the extra corner of his stale biscuit, and for a moment you forgive him for every snore, spill, and sock-related crime. Mail call, even when it disappoints, is a ritual of hope. The letters may be wet, smudged, or full of bureaucratic nonsense, but they are proof that life goes on somewhere beyond the wire. And even if you get nothing but a bill, you keep lining up, keep hoping, keep believing that next time it will be good news, a scrap of normal, a reminder that you are more than just a muddy uniform in a forgotten ditch. And that hope, dangerous as it is what gets you through until the next mail call. Because if the world still remembers your name, maybe, just maybe, you can remember who you are. They say an army marches on its stomach, but in the trenches, your stomach mostly just files complaints. Every meal is a surprise, sometimes a pleasant one, but usually not. There's always the mystery stew, the infamous bully beef, which seems to contain neither bull nor beef, and the biscuits that could double as paving stones. Once, someone finds a stray raisin in their rations, and it's treated like a sign from above. You spend hours fantasizing about real food, anything that doesn't bounce when dropped. Dining in the trenches is less about eating and more about developing a lifelong suspicion of anything labeled chef special. You approach each mess tin with caution, as if it might bite back. Army stew is a masterclass in ambiguity. A soupy mixture of root vegetables, unidentifiable meat, and the occasional floating object that nobody claims responsibility for. You try not to ask questions. The first rule of trench cuisine is never ask what's in the stew. The second rule is never, ever ask what's in the stew. Bully beef, a legendary ration with a reputation as tough as its texture, quickly earns a spot as both a source of nutrition and an inside joke. You attack it with your dull army knife, chiseling off a chunk with all the enthusiasm of an archaeologist unearthing a fossil. The taste? Somewhere between shoe leather and existential dread, with a lingering aftertaste that haunts your dreams. Private Jones once attempted to fry a slice over a candle, creating an aroma that drove even the rats from the dugout. Then there are the biscuits, army issue in every sense. They arrive in crates and are handed out with the solemnity usually reserved for medals or last rites. Each biscuit is a perfect square, dense enough to stop small arms fire and dry enough to turn your mouth into the Gobi Desert. You develop techniques for eating them safely, soaking them in tea until they resemble something edible, or crumbling them into stew and pretending it's a delicacy. Jenkins tries to trade his biscuits for anything, even a half-burned matchstick. He's rarely successful. Sometimes the rations gods are merciful. Someone finds a raisin in their pudding, or a lonely sliver of onion, and suddenly the entire trench is gathered around, marveling at this culinary miracle. The raisin is divided with military precision, half a raisin each, if you're lucky. For a moment, you forget about the mud and the cold, focused solely on the faint, sweet taste of hope. Of course, mealtime is also performance art. You and your mates rate each stew with theatrical flair. Tonight's has a hint of turnip and regret, with just a whisper of despair. The mystery meat becomes the subject of endless speculation. Some say it's beef, others insist it's horse. Jenkins claims it's a root vegetable that's been in the pot too long. The only certainty is that you'll be hungry again in an hour and just a little more skeptical of anything in a tin. There are creative attempts at variety. Jones claims to be an amateur chef and once whips up a surprise pudding from crushed biscuits, jam, and the dregs of everyone's tea. It's memorable. The group's verdict is that it's edible, in the sense that you could technically swallow it and remain conscious. Still, you appreciate the effort, anything to break up the endless parade of beige, salty, slightly gelatinous meals. You bond over food, or the lack of it. Mealtime complaints become a ritual, a way to vent and connect. You swap stories about family dinners back home, Sunday roasts, fresh bread, hot apple pie, reminding each other that somewhere beyond the wire, people are eating real food, with flavor and texture and ingredients you can actually identify. And so, you carry on, fueled by mystery meat, haunted by biscuits, and holding out hope for the day you'll sit at a real table with a plate that doesn't double as a shovel. Until then, every meal is an adventure, every bite, a gamble, and every raisin a tiny victory in the ongoing war against hunger and army cuisine. Believe it or not, creativity survives even in the mud. Some men whittle intricate figures from broken rifle stocks, others carve poetry into shell casings, and a few just build elaborate castles out of mud and despair. You try your hand at a drawing, only to have a rat run off with your last piece of charcoal. Still, trench art becomes a way to keep sane, a stubborn, muddy rebellion against the grim monotony. Sometimes, the best you can do is write, send socks on a sandbag and hope someone takes the hint. At first, you wouldn't think the trenches are much of an artist's retreat. The usual supplies are in short order. No clean canvas, no oil paints, no handy clay, unless you count mud, and you will eventually. What you do have is endless time to kill nerves to steady, and a landscape overflowing with potential materials if you're not too fussy about provenance. Shrapnel, spent bullet casings, bits of barbed wire, and dented mess tins become the palette of the modern trench artist. It starts with boredom. Maybe you find yourself carving a pattern into the wooden butt of your rifle during a long, slow watch. Maybe you pick up an empty shell case and realize the metal shines when you scrape the grime away. Soon, the men around you are trading stories about the best way to polish brass or arguing over the sharpness of the one remaining penknife. Jenkins, ever the showman, claims he's making a portrait of the general out of matchsticks and pure resentment. You haven't seen it, but you believe him. Every dugout becomes a gallery. Shell casings are engraved with dates, initials, and sometimes secret messages, love letters disguised as military graffiti. A broken fork, bent just so, becomes a tiny sculpture of a horse. The resident poet laureate scratches verses onto tin can lids, stringing them up along the dugout ceiling for a bit of culture between bouts of existential dread. Someone even manages a chessboard out of ration crate splinters, complete with pieces whittled from chalk and bone. Mud, too, finds its way into the act. There's an unspoken contest for most elaborate mud castle, and the rules change every day. Jenkins' masterpiece, featuring a working drawbridge and what he claims is authentic trench rat scale, survives for 3 hours before the real rats declare war and occupy it. You attempt your own sculpture, only to watch it melt in the next downpour. A fitting metaphor, you decide, for most things in the trenches. Sometimes, art is pure necessity. Need a sign for the latrine? Find a splinter, scratch an arrow, and hope it stays upright long enough to warn the next victim. Fancy a bit of home? Draw a chalk mural of your street back home on the trench wall. The rain will get it eventually, but for a few days, you'll have a view that isn't mud and sandbags. The greatest innovation is, perhaps, the Send Socks campaign. Someone starts by carving the words into a sandbag. Before long, the phrase appears everywhere, scratched into helmets, painted on spent rounds, even spelled out in biscuit crumbs at breakfast. It becomes the unofficial motto of the platoon, and a gentle, collective plea to whoever reads it. Quartermaster, postman, divine power, please, just socks. For a while, these small acts of creation keep your mind off the monotony, the waiting, and the fear. They're not just distractions. They're proof that something human and hopeful can survive even here. Each piece is a stubborn act of optimism, muddy, rough-edged, and sometimes only lasting until the next rain, but real all the same. So you keep drawing, whittling, carving, and building, even if the only audience is a rat with questionable taste. In the trenches, art is survival, humour is defiance, and every muddy masterpiece is one more reason to get up and try again tomorrow. So tonight, as you drift off in your own bed, clean sheets, warm socks, and maybe just the faintest hum of the fan instead of distant artillery, spare a thought for the souls who survived the trenches of World War II. Because while we joke about soggy biscuits, rebellious rats, and boots that fit like medieval torture devices, the reality was grit, endurance, and an astonishing ability to laugh in the face of mud, misery, and chaos. Imagine those cold, endless nights, huddled in the dark, where hope came in the form of a letter, a dry pair of socks, or a story whispered under the moon. These were people who learned to build something like home from sandbags, to find beauty in the ugliest of places, and to keep going even when every bone in their body just wanted to sleep for a week straight. If resilience had a flavour, it'd probably taste like bully beef and ration biscuits, and somehow they managed to stomach it all. So as you settle in, let the absurdities of the past make your present just a little softer. Maybe give your pillow an extra fluff and say a quiet thank you for indoor plumbing, central heating, and a distinct lack of aggressive trench rats. History reminds us that people are stubborn, hopeful, and wildly creative, even when the world is trying its best to turn them into mud statues. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, safe and dry, take a deep breath. The only thing lurking under your bed is probably a dust bunny and maybe that sock you lost last laundry day. Not a rat the size of a cat. Good night. Sleep well. You've survived another day. No mud, no air raids, no soggy boots required.